and dear friends of the Jewish community in Mexico City. On your high holiday, I greet you. I would like to start off at the beginning, where I came from and how I got there, to the liberation of the Tren that Orly has spoken of. I was born and raised in New England, the very northeastern corner of our continent. You are in the southwestern corner of our continent, and I'm living in the southeast corner of our continent. Thankfully to Skype, I'm able to speak with you today. As I said, I was raised in New England, and at the time, I'm speaking of the 1930s and the 1940s. But in the 1930s, there was very little talk about Hitler and the trials and tribulations of the Jews in Germany. We thought it was propaganda. We paid no attention to it. This was a European problem. Let them solve their own problems. We'll just stay out of it. Time went on. Diplomacy failed. And we were drawn into the war. Of course, we had to prepare ourselves for this endeavor, because in the years following World War I, our country let our Army and Navy fall into decline. And we had a very poor, sorry Army. Nothing that could approach the Army that Hitler had in Europe, or was developing. We began to increase our Army, our state militias, and I joined the National Guard militia in New England and came to Camp Landing here in Florida and did a year's training. At the end of the year's training, we were supposed to go back to our homeland, but unfortunately, on December 7th, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And that drew us into the war, and we were in the Army then for the duration. Of course, Hitler and the Japanese and Mussolini, the Italian, joined forces as the Axis powers. And they were a powerful machine. Nothing that we could touch. So we here in America had to go to work and start raising our Army up to a reasonable standard, increasing our Navy, and this took time and money, of course. In the meanwhile, the Germans were sinking many of our ships. They were carrying cargo supplies to England, who was attempting to counter the things that Hitler was doing in Germany. Hitler was rounding up the Jews, making everything very disagreeable and uncomfortable for the Jews, implementing many laws. The Jews could not own bicycles, they could not own automobiles, they could not ride in transportation, public transportation. They could not teach schools. They could not hold any public jobs. They were being brought down to their knees. And eventually, many of them protested, and they were put into concentration camps. As time went on, more and more of these Jews were put into concentration camps. We in America knew nothing about what was going on over there at that time. But occasionally, a small article would be in the newspaper about Hitler punishing the Jews, torturing them to some extent. But we thought that was propaganda. We didn't believe it. Still further, as time went on, one or two of these Jews would escape from one of these camps and go back to their synagogue and tell the story about hundreds of Jews being tortured, overworked. But the rabbis, they knew better. They knew that the German people were a very intelligent, educated people, and they would not stoop that low to do to the Jews what these two Jews were saying. They were declared as incompetent, crazy. So if those rabbis did not believe what these men were telling them, why should we in America believe? Propaganda. Forget it. Time went on. We built up our army to a sizable group, and I joined with the 30th Infantry Division in 1943. We were prepared to go to war. We came to Europe, came to England, and we trained there for 3 months. And then we had the invasion on the 6th of June, 1944, invaded France. And again, in our army newspapers, little articles be in there. A Jew escaped from a certain camp, went to a synagogue, told the story about thousands of Jews being tortured and overworked. Again, the rabbis didn't believe them, declared them crazy, forget it. So again, why should we worry about that? The rabbis in their own town don't believe them, why should we believe them? So this went on for, months. We traveled across France, fighting the Germans all the way, had heavy battles at St. Lo, Mortain. We chased the Germans across northern France, back into Belgium, across Belgium into Holland. By that time, we had exhausted our supply lines. All of our supplies had to come from Omaha Beach, where we initially landed on June 6, 1944. And this supplies are all brought up, brought forward to us by truck. And that was a very slow process. So we had to wait in Holland for about a month for supplies to build up so that we could go through the Siegfried line and continue on the destruction of Hitler and his army. They attacked us in the middle of the winter, December 1944, in the Ardennes, the Belgian mountains of Ardennes. It was a calculated risk that no one in their right mind would mount an attack in the middle of the winter in the mountains. So the line was very thinly held, Consequently, the Germans did attack at that point, broke through. This set us back about 2.5, 3 months before we could push that line back to where it was and continue on our conquest of Germany. Still no evidence of any camps of these thousands of Jews. Nothing. We went up around the western end of the Ruhr industrial area. And on the 24th of March, 1945, we crossed the Rhine River. And our next objective was to be the city of Brunswick. We moved forward and captured the city of Brunswick on the 10th of April, 1945. Still, up to this time, no evidence of any kind of a concentration camp, no Jews being persecuted, nothing. Now, unknown to us, just to our north, was the concentration camp Bergen-Belsen. We knew nothing about this until after the fact. Bergen-Belsen was one of the most notorious camps in the entire system that Hitler had for the torture and overworking of Jews. There were approximately 60,000 Jews in this camp. And they were not sent to gas chambers. There were no gas chambers at Bergen-Belsen. It did have a very small crematorium. But they could not process the number of people through that crematorium that they wanted. And they knew at this time, the early part of April, that the British Army, this was in the British zone, that the British Army was approaching the camp, and General Kruger, who was the camp commander, did not want the British Army to see the condition that these people were in. They had also set up a model camp, model barracks, there at Bergen-Belsen. And the people living in that barracks were all well-fed and well-clothed. This was for the American Red Cross, the British Red Cross, to come and visit the camp and investigate and see about these rumors that they were hearing about the Jews being tortured. Well, here's this lovely barracks, nice and clean. The inmates all well-fed, well-clothed. Everything is fine. And they left. Kruger would not let them see any of the other barracks, the condition that they were in. But here again, he wanted to get these Jews out of Bergen-Belsen so that when the British Army did approach and come there to the camp, they would not find the Jews in the condition that they were in. So on the 7th, and the 9th, and the 10th of April, he loaded up 3 train loads, about 2,500 people each, and was sending them to Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. At Theresienstadt, there were the most efficient gas chambers and crematorium in the entire system. So these people were to be fed to the gas chambers, crematorium, and dispose of their bodies in large pits that they had dug for the remains. Train number 1 did make over several days and arrived in Theresienstadt on the 20th of April. Train number 2 went by a different route, and on the 20th of April again, they were captured by the Russian army. We don't know what happened to those people. The Russians did not like the Jews, and may have disposed of them, we don't know. But the other train, by a different route, came down through Magdeburg and went across the river toward Theresienstadt, but they met some people there of their own that told them that the Russian army was approaching, that they better go back to where they came from and to go someplace else. Get rid of these Jews somewhere else. So the train came back to Magdeburg, and after they came back into Magdeburg, they blew up the bridge, thinking that the Russians might come and they would not be able to get across the river at Magdeburg. So this train stopped in the little village of Farsleben, which is about 10 kilometers north of Magdeburg. Now, going back just a little bit, the trains, as they left Bergen-Belsen, our particular train that I'm speaking of had about 40 cattle cars and 2 or 3 antiquated passenger wagons. In these cattle cars, which were antiquated freight cars, we had used them in World War I to move our troops, and they called them 40 and 8s because they would hold a maximum of 40 people or 8 horses. That's the way we moved our troops in World War I. But here they are in the same cattle cars, and in each cattle car they had 70 to 80 Jews crammed in there. They were crammed in there like sardines, men, women, and children. On the floor of each car, the Germans were very considerate about this, they put 2 or 3 inches of straw. That was their bedding. But when they're packed in their cars like sardines, they had no room to sit down or to lay down. The only way they got down on the bedding was to collapse and just fall down. Now, for sanitary purposes, each car was equipped with what we call a 5-gallon bucket. Probably about 20, 25 liters. That was in the corner of the car. That was their toilet. Now you take the guy in one corner of the freight car, and he's got to go and do his business. He can't possibly get across that freight car to that bucket and do his business. So what is he going to do? He has to go. They just urinate and have bowel movements and let it run down their legs and their clothing. In the meanwhile, they are infested with lice, fleas. We knew not what kind of diseases these people had. Typhus was one of the worst things. that they could have. This train moved, it took them 6 days to move from Bergen-Belsen to Farsleben. It could only travel at night because if any train or vehicles were moving on the roads in the daytime, our American Air Force and the British Air Force would see them and they would go down and strafe them. Didn't make a difference who they were or what they were. If it was moving, they would down and strafe them. So they could only move these trains at night. They would stop once a day, at the end of the day, before the journey started, and give them a ration of food. What did that consist of? A cup of soup and a piece of boldly bread. What kind of soup did they have? It was a big bucket filled with water with potato peelings or turnip peelings in it. And they were lucky when it was ladled out if they got 1 or 2 of these little pieces of potato peelings. That was the nourishment that they had for 6 days. Now, I mentioned that we had captured Brunswick on the 10th of April. Our next objective was the town of Hillersleben. At Hillersleben, there had been a German research center and an air base. In this research center, there were several block barracks buildings and a hospital. We occupied those buildings with the American military government and the American Red Cross, who followed behind our division as we moved along. The next day, we moved on. Our next objective was to be Magdeburg. But in between Hillersleben and Magdeburg was a small village of Farsleben. And as we approached Farsleben, our column was being led by some tanks of our 743rd Tank Battalion. And they met a stream of DPs, displaced persons, coming up the road, heading to the west, and told our tank commanders that in this town of Farsleben, the Germans had set up an ambush and were waiting for us. And also, there was a trainload of Jews down there that they had just escaped from. So very cautiously, we approached the town of Farsleben, but our tank battalion found nothing of any consequence there. The Germans had left. But as they were moving on toward Magdeburg, went over a little hill, and looking down into the valley, they saw a train sitting on the siding. But very cautiously, they moved forward, approaching the train, and some of the people who had been in the passenger cars at the end of the train had been able to dismount and were laying around, resting, stretching out, and they saw these tanks coming. At first, they were not sure whose tanks they were. They had never seen American tanks before, but eventually a few of them approached our two lead tanks and began to jabber in their native tongue, Polish, Hungarian, all kinds of languages which we didn't understand. But among them was one young girl, she was perhaps 20, 21 years old, Gina Rappaport. She was from Warsaw, Poland. She could speak 7 languages and also Hebrew. So she started speaking to our tank commander in different languages, and he didn't understand. And finally, she hit on Yiddish. It just so happened that one of these tank commanders, George Gross, was a Jew, and he understood Yiddish. Consequently, Gina began to tell him the story about the train coming from Bergen-Belsen, who they were, where they had come from, how long it had taken, and all the details that we learned at this point in time. Mounted on our tanks, we had some infantrymen, and they immediately dismounted and went down and opened up the freight cars. They were astounded. The condition of the Jews in those freight cars, a little more than skeletons. They just fell out of the cars, and the stench from the feces and urine that accumulated in those cars over the 6 days came out, and our men were sickened by it. They had to turn around and vomit. Over a long period of time, they got most of these people out of the cars, and we had our medics come and attend to them. Some were in very bad physical condition. Others were in fair condition. But you must be reminded, we're still in a battle zone here. We have American artillery coming in, hitting the Germans and falling short. We have German artillery coming in on us and falling short. So we're afraid that these people are going to have more casualties. So this is where I came into the picture at the time. I had to round up all the transportation that our division could afford to let loose and load these people up and move them back to Hillersleben, a great place for them to be. We had the barracks there, and we had a hospital there. But the first thing we had to do, in turning them over to the American military government, they had to be processed. They had to be stripped of their clothing because they were so infested with lice. Their hair was infested with lice. You could see the lice crawling on them. There was no way to launder their clothing. It was thrown into a pile and burned. So now here's all these people, stark naked. 2,500 of them, many of them children, young children, who had never seen a naked body before. But our engineers had set up some shower points. And they had heard rumors before that the Germans had put these people into the showers a little drizzle of water would come down, and then the Zyklon B gas would come down and kill them within a matter of a few seconds. They were hesitant about going in our showers for fear that we were doing the same thing. So we had some of our own men strip down and go in through the showers to show them that these were legitimate showers. So consequently, we moved them through, moved them through the showers and got them to give them towels to dry off. Then we had a crew to dust these people with DDT. Now, you perhaps know DDT, at least here in America, it is a prohibited product today. It causes cancer. So it's prohibited to use DDT in America here today. But that was the best known remedy we had for fighting against the lice and the fleas that these people were infested with. Heavily dusted with DDT, they were given new clothing that had been gathered up by the Red Cross from the people in Farsleben. They took what they could get. It may not have been the fashion design that they wanted, may not have been the color that they wanted, but may not be the size they wanted. It was something to cover their body. They were then processed by nationalities and put in these barracks. The single people were put into one barracks, the married people were put into another barracks, some of them went into the homes that were there for the German officers. And those who were physically exhausted and needed medical attention were sent to the hospital. So at this point, my job ceased. These people were all in good hands with the American military government and the American Red Cross. So I bid them goodbye, good luck. Whatever your route is in life, I wish you well. And I went back to my unit. We finished attacking Magdeburg, which we captured on the 18th of April. And then we sat there and waited for the Russians to move up in front of us. And of course, then the war ended on the 8th of May. Now, we have these people in Farsleben being processed. Many of them are elderly people. And they were smart enough back in the early and mid-30s to see the handwriting on the wall, what Hitler was doing to the Jews. And they went to various embassies in their cities to get passports to go to that embassy's country. Australia, Brazil, Mexico, America, Canada, you name it. Wherever they would be accepted. Now I must say, at this point, the United States was very anti-Semitic. We had thousands of Jews here in America, but we didn't want thousands more. So we closed the door. No Jews. We had a case where a shipload had passports to go to Cuba. And when they arrived in Cuba, they declared that the passports were false. They wouldn't accept them. So they came up the coast to America, Miami, we wouldn't accept them. Charleston, we wouldn't accept them. New York, we wouldn't accept them. And they had to go back to Europe. That was a 90-day trip for that boatload of Jews, hoping that they could find a haven somewhere. But these other Jews had obtained passports, and before they could gather up their families and say, let's get out of here, the Iron Curtain came down and they were trapped. So they had to endure 3-4 years of hardship until the time of their liberation. And of course, when they were liberated at Farsleben, these Jews had a passport. So immediately, those groups were sent to Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Australia, whatever the passport dictated. But then there was a lot of them left that did not have proper identification, no passports. So many of them were sent to Israel. Palestine, before Israel became a state. Now here are these Jews, those who had passports and those who didn't, scattered all over the world. Now, several years ago, I started a crusade. What happened to these children that was on that train? Now, of the 2,500 people that were on that train, about 700 of them were children, 21 years of age and less. And how we know this, the Germans were very meticulous about keeping records. So that when these people were loaded up into these trains, they had their name, their birth date, and their birthplace. Now I was able to obtain a list of these people from the foundation in Bergen-Belsen a few years ago when I paid them a visit. And in going down through this list, I could go by the dates and pick out who the children were. And I picked out the ones that were 21 years of age and less. And that's where we come up with about 700 children total. Now I started researching these people. What happened to these little kids? Some of them were grown, 21 years of age, but the most of them were smaller. What happened? Well, their parents had taken them to the country that they had their passport for, and they became educated and grew up in those areas. Now, it was easy, not easy, but fairly easy to trace the boys because the most of them retained their same name. With the girls, they had married, changing their names. It was very difficult to locate them. So in locating some of these boys, they knew another family. And I contacted them. Oh yes, my daughter married so-and-so, and she changed her name. Now she is another name. But in all of my research, I have found 275 of these children. They're scattered all over the world. And what do? I have tried to contact each and every one of them to find out what happened to you from the time you left the train with your parents to where you live today, what happened in your life? Where were you educated? What did you do? And it's so rewarding to me to have found these people and to learn what they have done and how they have become a great part of our society today. Dr. Lantos, Peter Lantos from Hungary, he grew up and is today a neurosurgeon in London. Mika Tomkovitz, doctor from Warsaw. He's a professor at the New York State College in Brooklyn. George Somjan, another doctor of environmental engineering. Alan Claris, an electrical engineer. On and on and on. Gloria Failing, a psychologist. Rosanna Garib, another psychologist. And she has two daughters who are dentists and doctors. So these 275 people, very few of them have reached maturity, which they are today, in their 60s and 70s. Very few of them are at the lower labor standard. Most all of them are high-level professional people. One of them became a doctor. He's a doctor of nuclear physics at Brown University in Rhode Island. So this is the thing that is rewarding to me, to know that I helped to give these people a second life and become a part of our society as we are today. I'm trying to think of something else in connection with this. There were so many things that happened. I am the last surviving veteran of the 30th Division who had any hands-on experience with this train. There are many more veterans still living, but they knew nothing or had nothing to do with the train. So I am the last living survivor of this train episode. Among these people saved is our Orly Bagel among your group there. Another, I don't know if he's here or not today, Julio Baton. He is a survivor. He was a child survivor. Orly is a survivor through her mother. Her mother was on this train. There may be other people in Mexico that we haven't been able to reach out to yet. And I continue my search, looking for these people and trying to get in contact with them.